This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. James Altucher is the guest today, and James is interesting, to say the least. He brings a very, very honest perspective at life, the mental side of the equation, health, happiness, and that's the key. You know, you can have all your rules, you can have all your systems, but you better have the stuff upstairs figured out. And so follow along with James and I think it's a good conversation, a good back and forth. And it's a really good foundational perspective, regardless of how you want to make money. As a trend following trader, as an entrepreneur, as a business person, I don't care. But this way of thinking about oneself, thinking about the mental side of the equation, if you don't have that figured out and your life is filled with drama, it's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one. I hope you enjoy it. Today on the show, I have James Altucher, and James has got a wide and varied career, from hedge fund manager to author to blogger extraordinaire. And if you've not seen his blog, The Altucher Confidential, you must. James was kind enough to give me a really cool endorsement on one of my last books, Trend Commandments, basically saying it was must read. But I really think if you're trading, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're making money, if you're trying to get a job, if you're trying to create something, I think the way that James is describing the world and life, etc., on his site is much more important in my mind than just worrying about some one technique. Because I think what he's ultimately getting at is the 6 inches between our ears. Is that a fair enough view?
Yeah, Mike. And first off, thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here, and it's excited to finally have an in-depth discussion with you. We've kind of crossed paths several times over the past 10 years, I would say, without actually doing one of these. Yeah,
and I think actually probably when we first got started, it was probably in my youth of picking fun battles. I'm sure I picked on you. You might have picked on me. One of those kinds of things. I think we were, trading. We were in terms of trading. We were philosophically on different sides in terms of trend following or counter trend, because I was very much a short-term counter trend trader, and you were following a lot of the trend following hedge fund managers. And now I kind of see the wisdom of both ways. Yeah. So I defer to you in terms of, I think both sides are correct. Well, and I think ultimately too is as you get older, you start to realize, and I explain this to people all the time, it's the mental side anyways. Once you have your technique down, then 99% of it becomes the mental. So I think that's why I wanted to talk to you, is when I go through your blog and everything, it's like, this is the important stuff, it's the thinking, the life.
It's really true in the sense that most people say to me, oh, I want to learn how to trade. What book should I read first? And I always say, don't trade, because like you say, 99% of the battle is psychological, and most people don't want to deal with it. They all think, oh, I can handle the psychology. That's just the mind. I really just need that magic technique that's going to make money every year. But you look at the best hedge fund managers, what always amazes me about them is not their returns, but how they were able to handle those down years and still survive as a business and as a human being. And it's remarkable. Like, you cover many of them, like John Henry, his first 2 or 3 years in business were down years. I would have jumped off a building if I had those years. And yet here he is. He owns the Boston Red Sox now.
Yeah. Well, and you've had a lot of ups and downs, and I think that's what's so cool about what you're doing these days is it's seemingly, and maybe this is your drive, your motivation, you're single-handedly trying to get people to be transparent Is that a fair assessment? You just seem that, and with your leading with yourself. I mean, you're leading with yourself. You're saying, I want to be transparent. I don't want to hide anything.
Right, because, and the real reason is we're all going through a difficult time. This past decade has been very hard for just about everyone. We've all, at the very least, have had a roller coaster. No one's had a straight up or a straight down move. We've had a roller coaster. But everyone needs to feel like, oh, life is perfect. It's like, we all have friends who have been to Las Vegas, and when they get back, you ask them, hey, how did you do? And they all say, oh, yeah, I probably won a little money. And they're lying. They all lost money. But no, everybody wants to act like they've had a perfect time, whether it's trading or their relationships or life in general or their gambling or their stock trading, whatever. But the reality is, what I try to do with my blog and with my writing is tell people that it's okay to fail. It's okay to slow down. It's okay, to use a cliche, it's okay to stop and smell the roses. And so I demonstrate that by my own example, where I've failed, where I've had to slow down, where I've had to completely change directions in order to survive and, to be quite frank, not kill myself in the process. So this is a common thing, and I try to give permission for others to know that it's okay to feel the same way.
Well, let me jump into a specific topic. There's a lot of things that I want to discuss that's on your blog, and I have a feeling what I'm going to bring up right now is near and dear to you. It's actually very near and dear to me, and I'm only about 2 months in, but I'm officially a yoga convert.
Congratulations.
Yes, I'm. So I am, and I've told people at the end, and since the young lady that's training me, teaching me, and she's using a lot of Sanskrit phrases, I don't know them all yet, but at the very end, when you're laying on your back, I've told people it's the only point in time in my life where my brain goes completely flatline, blank, nothing's there.
Well, what's interesting about that, Mike, is that, yoga is part of our process. And what happens when you're doing the physical yoga is actually meant specifically to tire your body and mind out completely so that you leave behind the daily thoughts, obsessions, and fears and aversions and cravings of the day. It's supposed to completely leave your mind blank. And then after yoga, the way the yogis do it is they do pranayama, which is breathing, in order to stimulate your mind. So now, with your mind completely blank and with your mind newly stimulated by breathing, these breathing exercises, then you're supposed to meditate. So the whole goal of yoga is to get you to that quieter state of mind where your mind is still active, but not active in the way that it normally is during the day, so that you're then able to meditate and try to find some peace in your life.
Yeah, I think we'll probably, and it's a very nuanced thing, and I'm learning that along the way too. Is you can have your first experience doing it, and a couple months in, you start to have those little aha moments where you're like, and you just kind of look at your instructor, and she's like, "Oh yes, now you get it. Now you see what," and that's what's kind of cool about it. But like you just described it very eloquently about the purpose. But anyways, I saw that you had some good experiences with that, and I'm sure you'd probably recommend because I know you're pretty. How often are you in yoga per week?
Probably every day.
Every day.
Not necessarily the full practice every day.
Yeah.
Which could be 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But I'll do some every day, just because it's nice to be able to take your body and put it into a situation where it doesn't really want to be, but it's like a mind over matter. Like your body doesn't want to twist and then take 5 deep breaths. Yeah. And so when you're controlling your breath and your body in such a way, your body wants to fight you, and this is your way to train both body and mind.
Yeah, no,
so it's a very powerful practice for traders, for instance, or for anybody.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I'm sure there's gonna be some skeptics that immediately hear us talking about this and they're like tuning out already, like, oh guys, these 2 nut jobs are talking about yoga. They missed the point. I can't help
Well, it's also really good exercise.
Absolutely.
And, it's the first couple of times I did yoga, I couldn't even believe how much I was sweating and how tired I was at the end. And I had just come off a year of training with a trainer, which was also pretty brutal, but he was focusing mostly on weightlifting and running. And yoga, I don't want to say it was more or less brutal, but it was definitely brutal to me. Like I couldn't believe how hard it was.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a convert. I mix it in with a bunch of other stuff, but I'm definitely a convert. Let me throw a couple things at you that have been on your blog, have been popular for a while, because I think it's worth elaborating. especially here we are in this economy that, clearly some people are doing well and some people aren't doing so well, but it's been very up and down and volatile, as you've said, over the last decade or so. 10 reasons to quit your job right now. I have a feeling you have some strong views.
Yeah, well, I think for many years, particularly like with the baby boomers coming out of, who were born out of World War II, they were sort of born into this world where the United States needed people for jobs, needed people for the labor force. So there became this entire myth of corporate stability that you'll get a job and you'll stay in there for the rest of your life and you'll get a gold watch at the end and job well done, you built your country, congratulations. But that myth is over. We saw it first with the dot-com bust where, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs were lost. Then we saw it with the housing bust, then the financial crisis. And even since the financial crisis, millions and millions more jobs have been lost, or people have become underemployed or unhappy employed or whatever you want to call it. And there is no job stability. The tide has come in. People will fire you at a moment's notice and they will exploit you all along the way. And they won't pay you as much as you deserve. And what you deserve, you will then get taxed on. So people have to start thinking creatively now that it's not just about having one job and here I stay no matter how poorly I'm treated, no matter how poorly I'm paid, no matter how poorly I'm taxed. People need to figure out how to get multiple streams of income where they're the master of their own destiny. So I call this now the choose yourself era, where you have to kind of, figure out what you want to do, then figure out how to make money from it, and then hustle really until you've chosen yourself, until now you're making a living doing what you want to do, what you love to do.
Yeah, and I think if people are out there and they're like, well, gosh, what do James and Michael have in common? But all you have to do is pay attention for a second to realize that you're two people on this this conversation that are used to waking up each day to figuring out a way to control what happens to them in terms of how they earn money. And it's not, I don't wake up each day and say, I've got to worry about saying yes, sir, to, such and such bad name. But, and I think that's a really important thing that I think, and I've been saying it for probably to myself for like 15 years, is that, gosh, when are people going to come around to this idea? Because it's the freedom to it is so awesome too. You can be creative. There's the freedom, and it's just all these things that I'm sure that if we could talk for hours and hours and hours about, that we relate to, that you almost just want other people to understand too.
Sure. It's there's two sides of it. One is, I remember a friend of mine who quit her job, and it was her first day in the new world, and I had to tell her, because she was scared, like she didn't have a job, she was trying to figure it out, and I had to say, welcome to the real world, because you've broken free from the prison. Now this is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to kind of hustle and figure out how to make money and how to do what we love. The flip side of it is, it's really scary. If you have bills to pay and you have to hustle every day to figure out where the money's going to come from, it's actually not that much different from the corporate job, but it's a lot scarier because you have to make sure you're always on top of things. You're at work basically 7 days a week now when you don't have that corporate job.
Yeah. Let me, because it's all related, and I think when I look a lot of your work, and it reminds me of my stuff, and there might not be a straight line, even though I love a lot of the lists that you're doing, though. That's kind of inspiring me somewhat. But let me just bring up one term, and just greed. When you hear this phrase, how does it make you feel? And can you describe your views of greed over the last 15 years and how the changes, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think greed means different things at different times, and you look at it per decade. Like in the 80s, we had, the Michael Douglas, Wall Street, greed is good sort of saying. Then in the 90s, you had greed a little more associated with innovation. So people would create internet companies and hope to create billions from it. And that was greedy, but at the same time, we saw something developing, the greatest technological revolution for the masses that the history has ever seen. And then in the 2000s, we got back to the ugly side of greed again, where financial innovation was going faster than the real innovation that was trying to keep up with it. And so we had the housing bust and the financial crisis that was caused by greedy hedge fund managers, bankers, and so on. But now we have an uglier twist to it, which is that people are trying to stop innovation because they associate it too closely with greed. So almost any innovation now, it's the whole Occupy Wall Street, almost any innovation now is considered greedy, when in fact, innovation does need money to fund it. Like if we're gonna, for instance, clean up all the polluted water in the world, that needs money. That needs tens of billions of dollars to finance it, and companies and creative geniuses to figure out the solutions. And this is maybe one of the greatest problems facing the world right now. So greed is inextricably linked to making money, to innovation, to solving problems in the world. But every now and then, the financial innovation that's used to fund that innovation gets ahead of itself, and the greed becomes ugly. It gets insider trading. It gets, exploiting the investors, exploiting the common man. But we have to remember ultimately that innovation requires funding, and people don't go into that innovation without, many people go into becoming inventors and creators because they want to get paid for it. So they're all linked together.
What's interesting about the way you just described that is I was imagining an audience in front of you giving that last couple minutes, and the audience was exactly 50% Democrat and 50% Republican, at least American-based politics. And I think the way you just described that, I would think the vast majority of both groups would probably agree with you, except for some reason or another, we can't get both groups to understand what you just said.
Right, and that's okay. People, the masses don't want to innovate and create. They want to pay their bills. And so what happens is they see other people making billions while they, particularly right now in this day and age, right now the average person is having trouble paying next month's bills, and other people are making billions trying to be innovators. So we get a little bit jealous. We don't want them to have billions, even if it does mean that they're innovating. So we cancel out the innovation side of the equation and we just call it greed. But the reality is we have to have room in our society for the true creatives and geniuses, of which I'm not one of them. I'm not claiming to be one of them. But we have to allow for these geniuses to create and innovate and solve the world's problems. How do we diagnose cancer earlier? How do we solve clean water issues? How do we solve alternative energy issues? How do we make the internet faster? All these problems and more require billions of dollars to finance. The government does not have any history of financing these things. So it's the private sector combined with Wall Street that together in partnership finances these innovations.
So let me switch gears on you. Who are you? Why have you, for those that are not familiar with your work, who is James, and why have you taken this path that you've taken with your website? Anybody that goes to your website for 5 minutes is going to realize, and I can almost predict where some of your influences are, but you're doing it together in your own stew, so to speak. It's your own creative thing, and it's definitely unique. Who are you?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question.
I got you stumped. Finally, there we go. Stumped. Damn, I've been waiting for one.
I mean, I'm basically someone who's succeeded a little bit, failed quite a bit, and tried to figure out why have I failed. How have I gotten off the floor the many times I failed in order to have some of the successes that I've had? And then I want to share that with people. There's an ego side in that I want to share that with people because I want people to like me. And there's also a side where I legitimately think this is the best way I can innovate and help people. So, I do it through the blog. I do it through a newsletter. I don't charge anything for the blog. I'm fortunate that way. And I'm very happy to be helpful to people, and I'm also very happy that people like my stuff. Else I wouldn't do it. Although I have to say, a lot of people hate my stuff as well, and that makes me unhappy. So I'm all out there for people to see, like the good and the bad and the ugly, and mostly the ugly.
Well, so was there a moment, or in your current incarnation with the blog, is there a moment with the blog that you either wrote something that gave you feedback that inspired you to keep going and to take it to a whole new level? Was there a moment or a trigger where you just kind of said, "Man, I'm going to double down. I'm affecting people. I'm going to ramp this up." Was there a moment?
Yeah, I mean, there was a period where I was getting rejected by everyone in terms of job opportunities, media opportunities, investments. There was just no way I was able to kind of break out and kind of reinvent my career, which earlier I had made websites about stocks. I had made businesses creating websites. I had been on CNBC quite a bit. I had columns in newspapers. And suddenly I felt like I was getting desperate, asking for permission too many times from too many people who weren't giving me permission. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to write on my own blog. People have been telling me for 10 years I should write on my own blog, and I'm just going to tell how I feel instead of, trying to figure out what other people want to hear from me. And so I started being honest, and I noticed with every one of my posts, somebody would respond or tweet or send me an email with basically the 4 letters OMFG, which, most people know the translation of. And I thought, that's pretty good feedback. It means I'm kind of saying something that's shocking to people that they've never heard or expected before. And, that kept me going. And then a new thing started happening, which is I was getting a lot of feedback saying, this is really helping me figure out this situation. And we were all in the same situation. We were all underemployed. We were all grasping at the meager opportunities in front of us. We were all trying to choose ourselves. We were all trying to figure out a way to be happy without necessarily getting millions of dollars or promotions or getting on TV or getting a book published. We were all trying to choose ourselves to be happy, but nobody knew how. And they were getting a little bit of this from my blog, and that was the feedback I was getting, and that convinced me to keep going. And now I would say the blog is 20 hours out of my day. I think about it all day long.
So I'm guessing, and I kind of feel this way myself some most of the time, but I'm guessing that today your influences or what governs you is not necessarily outside forces. I'm guessing today you've got this to a point where you've so internalized that you're just, it's transparent James, and that's it. But I'm sure at some stage of the game growing up or coming along, there were other writers, traders. Who inspired you, your thinking, and had you evolve from the early stages to get to the point where you are now?
Well, I've definitely been influenced by a lot of different writers. So I don't start the day. I start every morning by doing at least 2 hours of reading of what I consider to be very high quality writers of usually very autobiographical fiction. So I like the autobiographical side because I always like to tell the truth about what's going on in my life. But I find literary fiction writers to be the best writers. So when they combine the two, autobiographical literary fiction, those tend to be very inspirational writers to me. And then I'm also inspired on the spiritual side. I think, everybody over the past century, and particularly over the past 50, 60 years, has confused religion with spirituality. Religion is mostly a cultural institution we grow up with and we raise our family in and so on. But spirituality is, how can I be happy even if circumstances are both good or bad? And so I'm inspired by a lot of writers who are able to pull the best elements out of various spiritual traditions and combine them in such a way that they make sense in our westernized modern age. So I would say those two forces, autobiographical literary fiction and really great spiritual writers who blend a lot of traditions, I would say those are my biggest influences. And then on the political/finance side, I tend to be influenced by writers and experts who take a very rational but also optimistic view of things. Like, every 10 years, people predict the death of society, the death of our culture. And it's true, bad things happen. And yet here we are. You and I are talking across thousands of miles, across this beautiful thing called the internet, and having a conversation that thousands of other people will listen to. Life is pretty amazing. And yet if you open up the newspaper, you would think society is about to die. So I'm also very influenced by rational thinking that takes an optimistic point of view.
Yeah, I was thinking about the other day, the optimism thing. It's when I meet people that are naturally happy and they have a real smile on their face, it's like you just want to hold on to them because you're just, it's sometimes in this day and age, it seems like those people are rare. And I think that's what we're ultimately it's about, is trying to and I know you've got some views on happiness, but that's what I'm looking for. It seems like it's who's smiling the most.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is that if and this is a fine line because it's double-edged. But of course, if you take it to extreme, if you have no expectations, you're always gonna get what you expect. So if you have no expectations at all, you'll be happy with anything thrown your way. Now, of course, we can't live in a world that way. We have to pay our bills, pay our rent, feed our children, and enjoy some pleasures in life. But if you could, I think in this day and age, if you can keep expectations low without being a monk, then that's, of course, a great way to find happiness. Combine that with health. So most people live lives that are very unhealthy. And I'm not just talking about physical health, but most people lead very unhealthy emotional lives. They have a lot of drama, a lot of intrigue. They hang out with negative people. Most people lead very unhealthy mental lives. They're not used to being creative. They're not used to developing their idea muscle. They're used to just kind of following the path of where everyone else followed. And most people lead very unhealthy spiritual lives. They do what was taught to them when they were 5 years old or 6 years old, and that becomes their spiritual life for the rest of their lives. I think all four areas need to be developed to be fully, holistically healthy: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And if you do that, then you'll be happy. For me, that's how I find happiness. That's how I get off the floor after I've suffered. That's how I continue on to another day, another business, another blog post, another idea, and so on.
I internalize and feel about many of the issues that you're saying exactly 100% the same. It's just a perfect correlation. Except what I like about what you're doing is you're expressing it so clearly. You've taken these things these views and thoughts, and they go on inside of us, and you're putting it to words, and you're just being very frank about it. And that's the refreshing part. That's what I enjoy.
Well, and the thing is, I'm plagiarizing a little bit, because if you look at like every spiritual teacher, or let's even call it every religion over the past 3,000 years, you look at Buddha. He said there's suffering in the world and you don't have to suffer. He didn't say you have to be happy or there's happiness in the world. He posed it in the negative. There is suffering in the world. If you look at Moses as an example, the Judeo-Christian tradition, he doesn't say go out and save the world. He simply says don't kill anybody. Don't steal, don't have adultery. Jesus says, turn the other cheek. He doesn't say, go out and help everyone you can. He simply says, try not to suffer as much as possible. Turn the other cheek if someone's attacking you. So again, we have to keep expectations low while working on our health. And that in a well-rounded way, you can't help but be as happy as possible.
Well, you're getting into a post of yours that I really like. What happens when you get honest? And some of your lines you have in here, I relate to all these. People will stop speaking to you. They'll think you're crazy. They'll get frightened. They'll trust you. Talk to me about this. What the experience that you've had of getting honest and the reactions people have towards your honesty.
Well, and this is a very interesting thing, because there's honesty and there's radical honesty. So I think someone even wrote a book called Radical Honesty, where there's almost no filter between what's in your brain and what comes out of your mouth, which I very much disagree with, because you could harm people. For instance, if you say to a random woman on the street, I want to have sex with you, you might be being honest, but that's radical honesty, and it's creepy and stalkerish, and you don't want to do that. But at the same time, you want to be honest about your feelings to yourself and to others, and you want to express things in such a way that there's no BS. This is important in the financial world. It's important in the newsroom. It's important in politics, and it's important just for living your daily life. So I've seen it with my blog. Some opportunities I've completely missed out on because my blog, some people consider, is too honest. And other I've actually though had.
Well, what's a good example of being too honest? What you don't have to give the names of who discounted you because of it, but what were you too honest about?
I would say most of my family thinks I'm too honest about things that are embarrassing, so they get embarrassed. They, for whatever reason, they associate their own emotional lives with my emotional life. And so if I'm honest about my emotional life, even if I don't mention them, they get embarrassed and want to not associate with me anymore. And that can happen with friendships as well. And I've also seen it happen in business opportunities where I might write a little bit too freely about opportunities I'm looking at, and people don't want to have anything to do with that, which I respect, no problem. But I will say at this point, most of my family does not speak to me because they don't want to. They don't want me to reveal anything in the blog, which I'm always good about. If anyone ever asks me to take something down, I always take something down, and I've always been very good about that. But a lot of people don't want to take the chance.
Talk about the freedom that you have found from being honest.
Well, I'll give an example with a company. So think about Google. So Google is what I view in a weird way, is a very honest website. There's absolutely no content on Google. All it is a logo and a search box. But you say to Google, I need help with fixing my TV. And so you type in, I need help fixing my TV. And Google will come back and say to you, I'll be honest with you, James. I don't know anything about fixing your TV, but here's 10 other websites you can go to that are completely unrelated to Google that might help you fix your TV. And by the way, here's 3 websites that pay us that also might be helpful for fixing your TV. So Google's totally honest, and they completely direct me away from their own website to other websites. What an unheard of thing to direct me to the competition, but they're just being honest. So who do I go back to the next time I want something fixed? Say I need to fix my brain. I go back to Google. That's the source. That's where I know that website's going to be honest with me. And the same thing happens at a personal level. If people know that you're being honest with them, then the next time they have a problem, the next time they have a situation that needs to be solved or helped, or they want to ask some question, or they just want to see, what you're writing about next, they go to you. They don't go to the websites that are going to lie to them. They go to the blogger or the website or the person who's going to potentially help them. You become the source. And that's how honesty, in a weird way, has given me many, many opportunities.
Yeah, I've had an interesting experience this year. I had done these podcasts years ago, but I stopped for about 3.5 years just doing other stuff, books and a film. And then I started them up this year, and I'm not sure exactly the reason why there's been people are interested, but I think it's just these kind of unfiltered conversations where people can listen in and see how other people think and learn from that, even if they disagree. And I mean, I've seen that. And the weird thing is I don't have any other judgment, because it's not like for whatever reason, let's say if you go to some of the really popular fundamental type blogs, you'll get like the college age guys in there posting all day long, and they just want to fight about politics and this and that. I don't see that at my blogs, but the only thing I can judge, like for example, on the podcast, is the traffic growth. So the listens on the podcast, for example, August is on pace to be 50% higher than July.
That's
and we're
great.
talking tens and thousands of people listening. And so it's really interesting to kind of watch. And I have to deduce that a lot of this is from the honesty. It's from the unvarnished type conversations, and not just my monologues, but having guests on like yourself, and everyone's just sharing. And it's making me realize that, you could always go out there, and if you look at the big TV shows, they try and get the brand name guests. Everyone has the Jim Rogers and the Mark Fabers. They're always on. What I'm finding, though, is that everyday people want to listen to people that they've maybe never even heard of before. And if they've got something interesting to say, people enjoy that. It's a really interesting experience to go through it. Very similar to what you're talking about, though.
Yes, and I think, it also combines with this idea that the internet has some element of voyeurism to it. You can essentially, peer in on other people's lives and learn about them and say, oh yeah, I can relate to that. And particularly when you hear 2 people talking, or you visit a Facebook profile, you can see little bits and pieces of other people's lives. Like you can live vicariously through many more people than we used to be able to live vicariously through. On top of that, particularly if you invite positive people on your show and you have a very positive outlook, people have a wider choice now than just their neighbors or their coworkers of who they're going to associate with. And it's healthier to associate with positive people. And the internet gives us that variety. And when you become known as a place where even if you're sharing failure and stress and anxiety, but you do it in a positive way, people, to be emotionally healthy, get attracted to that. And I think that drives traffic. It might not drive as much traffic as the Jersey Shore and having Snooki on your show, but it still drives good, meaningful traffic and people who want to listen to your message.
Well, I think that the key word there is meaningful, right? You know, I mean,
Yes.
That's the key thing. I mean, there's a lot of people following Kim Kardashian on Twitter, but I don't necessarily know what that means.
Right. And look, power to Kim Kardashian for building up her business. But at the same time, you know, if you can help somebody, then everything becomes worth it. And so I hope, you know, Kim uses her audience for good. But we'll see.
Yeah,
the jury's out.
And I'm not hating, just observing. You know, you had a post recently that I think we can both relate to this, having written books and had blogs and whatnot. But your post was how to deal with crappy people, and it really got me to thinking about not that I don't know your perspective on it, but I really don't focus on criticism anymore. I can remember my first book came out, and you know, people would literally, before Amazon had filters, people would go on there and basically make sexual innuendo about book titles. It was off the hook. At least they've cleaned up that to some degree. But
comments are particularly. I remember when my first book came out, there was a thread on EliteTrader.com that was so brutal against me. I called up the Elite Trader guys and I said, "Can you please take this thread down?" Like, I was literally crying about it, and they refused to take it down. They said, "No, it's getting a lot of traffic. We can't take that thread down." But you know, bad news is good news sometimes, and that book was my bestseller of all my finance related books.
Well, but it comes full circle. I think that's where I was ultimately going towards. Is I don't want people to feel like this is just Michael and James talking about their bouts of dealing with criticism, because I think it's interesting for other people to think about it. Is as the way the internet goes, everybody to some degree becomes a public figure. Okay, and if you don't account for it and start to have some understanding of how that's going to happen, eventually somebody's going to be sad about what somebody says about them. And you've got to have a way to deal with it. You've got to have an understanding of it. And I think my favorite way is the word troll. Because once I just look at it and say, "Oh, it's a troll," then I'm kind of like, you just kind of laugh about it.
Yeah. You know, what I tend to do is, you know, you use the word public figure, but at the same time, nobody really knows who you are. Nobody really knows who I am. So when they make a comment on my blog, for instance, and it's, let's say, hateful or negative, they're only really talking about themselves, because they don't really know who I am. They're just describing something about themselves, that they're an angry person, that they might be a hateful person, or that they might be a very sad or depressed person. So even if that anger is unleashed on me and say all sorts of hateful things about me, they're really saying more about themselves than they are about me. Similarly, if I respond in a negative way and argue with them, I'm saying more about myself than about them, because they're anonymous. I have no idea who they are at all. And so I tend to just view it as, you know, take away my name from it and pretend that they're just describing themselves, and that's probably closer to the truth than what they're actually saying about me. Someone wrote on my blog recently an interesting thing. I let her guest post. Someone really wrote recently that she sort of views all comments as divided into three buckets. 1/3 is people who like you. 1/3 is people who are going to hate you no matter what. You just can't help it. And 1/3 are going to be people who don't care at all. And that's basically how the world's divided up. And there's just nothing we can do about it.
Well, to me, I think if I can find my daily life, and you mentioned this early on, just drama free. I don't care whether it's business, an entrepreneurial venture, relationships. Just don't bring me your drama. I don't really.
Yeah.
I don't want it. I don't have anything to do with it. It's just going to go in one ear and out the other ear. It's not it's your issue. It's not mine.
You know, and I sort of feel that's true even on a macro level. Like, I don't read the newspaper, for instance, because I sort of feel every reporter is like a blog commenter. You know, they're all just bringing their own issues to the newspaper or to the TV news. And that's the case with most blogs as well. Everyone's just bringing in, you know, their angst, their fear, their anxiety. And I don't need that drama. I don't need their drama to be added, you know, to the drama in my life. So I tend to keep the TV off and try not to read the internet as much as possible. And, you know, I like to keep things simple. But it's hard to leave actually live a minimalist life in every way is hard.
I love the stuff that the guy at zenhabits.net says. He's really good about the minimalist views. I think he does a really, really good job. So what are you working on these days? I can't keep you all morning. So what are you working on these days? Do you have a book in the works by chance?
I get so many readers on the blog, and you probably know this as well. You get a lot more blog readers than book readers. And so I'm trying to decide whether to do another book when really my main focus is my blog, and I'm getting some great, a lot more views on my blog than I've ever had book readers. But I am working on developing a radio show, and I'm working with PBS on coming up with webisodes based on some of my blog posts. And I do a lot of angel investing. So I'm invested in about 15 different companies, and I'm actively looking for new angel investments all the time. And I spend a lot of time helping the companies that I'm currently invested in. And like you, I try to figure out what are going to be the trends that will hold up in the future, and I try to invest at the beginning of those trends. So, but I would say the main focus in my life, 20 hours a day, is my blog and then my own personal health, because I think me being healthy will help me help others to be healthy.
Well, 20 hours a day, how much sleep do you got in there?
Well, part of that sleeping is I view as working on the blog. So I like to sleep 8 or 9 hours a day, but I do that to stay healthy so I can work on the blog as productively as possible.
Well, I haven't really asked, and I'm not going to go into it too in depth because I don't think you're really. I don't think you spend much of your day making big macro predictions or whatnot either. But how would you describe? Because we've talked a lot about the internal life views that are maybe smart for people to think about and perhaps have and maybe adjust towards. But when you think about the markets today, when you think about opportunity today, and you mentioned the angel investing. Well, let's just talk about trading for a second. When you look at the current environment, how do you view the current environment? We got a situation right now where interest rates are at zero. The guys behind the secret marble columns down in DC have put interest rates at zero, and that's where we are. So, what's your view on this?
Well, it's very interesting because it used to be the case that if you wanted to have your money be safe and you wanted to hedge your exposure to the world, you would buy bonds. But bonds are not safe at all anymore, and they don't give you any return. Interest rates are near zero, and many countries, even first world countries, might have a problem paying back their debts without printing money, which will bring down the value of your bonds. So I think a lot of not only hedge funds and mutual funds, but sovereign wealth funds are looking for methods to increase their returns without counting on bonds. So we're getting back to a world where these, and we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, not just a few thousand here and there, but trillions of dollars is looking to find investment returns. Eventually, they're going to have to start looking for where is the innovation happening. And there is innovation happening in the world, and it's probably underinvested in right now, and it's probably going to be overinvested in, at some point in the future. I'm probably going to go through a huge period of reallocation from things like bonds and so-called safe investments to more innovative and creative investments. I mean, I was just meeting with somebody, just informally, someone who does manage hundreds of billions of dollars, and they're out there actively trying to figure out where is the so-called alpha, the extra return that one can get in the markets. And the answer is, how do you, what are the problems the world has right now? And, how can I help finance the solving of these problems? So eventually that will hit the markets, and the markets will go up as a result. Now, will we have another financial crisis? Will we have a money printing crisis? Who knows? But we will eventually diagnose cancer better. We will eventually solve some of these clean water issues. We will eventually find alternative energy solutions, and so on.
So for two different, I'll let you run on this one, but two different answers I'd love to see from your perspective. So the 20-year-old guy or gal that's out there, and the 50-year-old guy or gal that's out there, and they're listening to this conversation, and they're like, okay, you guys are having this big philosophical pie in the sky conversation. Maybe you've got your life set or da-da-da. Maybe they don't relate to what we've even said because, as you said in the beginning, they're so worried about paying the bills month to month. They don't have time to be an entrepreneur. They don't have time to be creative. They've just got to figure out a way to make money. So you got the 20-year-old and you got the 50-year-old. And James, you've seen a lot of different things on Wall Street. You've met a lot of different people, a lot of different experiences. And I'm not looking for a particular investment or trading idea, but just in general, how would you advise those two ages and how they should proceed in 2012? And maybe you can do it two ways. Maybe you can even say kind of the safe way and the potential to get rich kind of way for each group.
Well, I will say it's all the same. I'm going to give one answer for both, which is focusing on every day incrementally improving physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. Even if you think you have one and not the other, you actually need to improve all four things every day. So what can you do today? Just a small thing, even if the big aspects are hard. What can you do today to make yourself physically more healthy? Maybe you could sleep a little bit more. Maybe you could eat a little earlier in the day or eat a little bit less, or who knows. Emotionally, can you bring a positive person in your life and start to bring down a negative person in your life? Mentally, have you sat down today to come up with business ideas for yourself or any kind of ideas? Ideas to write a novel, whatever. Just start exercising that idea muscle before it atrophies. You want your idea muscle to be a machine on demand. And spiritually, are you grateful for the things you do have in your life instead of always worrying about paying the bills? If you do that every single day, then these other issues will get resolved. It will automatically happen that the job issues, the career issues, the money issues, the finance issues, the macro issues, these things will automatically get solved as you holistically take care of yourself internally. The external will take care of itself. All you really have is the internal. The external that you see and hear and believe in is just an outward manifestation of how you're taking care of yourself internally. So that is the only thing I would focus on, and the rest will take care of itself.
So if you've just listened to that and you've just disagreed with James, listen again, rewind the tape, listen again. And if you listen again, you still disagree, keep rewinding and keep listening again until you find yourself finally agreeing with what he just said. And if you can't ever agree with what he just said, all I can say is you're going to have a lot of drama.
Well, and I could say this, I say this only not as a self-help guy or anything, but just from personal experience. I was literally broke, on the ground, separated, practically suicidal, and, businesses going out of business. And I had to say to myself, listen, I have a family to feed. I got to get myself off the floor or out of the rain. And what am I going to do? And this is exactly how I've done it. And not once, and not twice, and not even three times. Hopefully I get it right this time. But I know every time I'm on the floor, this is the only way I've been able to get off the floor.
Well, I have a feeling that you and I are going to cross paths sometime here in the fall, in October, I believe.
Yeah, maybe. I think we're going to a similar conference.
Yes.
Yes.
So that should be interesting. So,
yes.
But until then, listen, James, the best place for you guys to go find out about James and his work, it's at JamesAltucher.com. That's James, James, Altucher, Altucher.com. There's a Twitter page too, or where was the best? Is that the best place to go?
And J Altucher on Twitter.
Okay. Well, listen, it was good chatting. I love having somebody who's willing to kind of just go all at the mental psych side, for lack of a better term, because to me, that's the stuff that intrigues me. The techniques, whatever technique you have, until you get the 6 inches between the ears figured out, the technique's not really going to be relevant.
Yeah, and Mike, once again, thanks for having me on the show, and it's good to finally, quote unquote, meet through Skype.
Yes, absolutely. James, you take care. Have a good day.
Thanks, Mike. You
take
too.
Care. Bye-bye.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.